The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to Paranormal Concept right here on Parasearch UK Radio with your host, Paul Brook.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm joined tonight by my lovely co-host, Kerry Greenway. Hello, Kerry.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I nearly missed the mute button then.
That mute button, it gets it every time.
Oh, tell me about it. So how's your week been?
It's been very interesting this week, or weekend, last week to this week.
Have you done anything paranormal?
Really good. Yeah, really good. Thank you. Lots going on.
All paranormal, yeah?
God, yeah. Don't do anything else, do I? Paranormal and crystals, that's my life.
Well, I suppose so, yeah, that's it, isn't it? I don't know. And tonight's show is all about the Knights Templar. I've had, for years, I've had an interest in the Knights Templar. And you always get little peaks throughout history of the Knights Templar. I mean, you got like the Crusades and stuff, and you hear a little bit here and there. But tonight we're joined by Norman Fahy, and he's going to tell us all about the Knights Templar. So, hello, Norman.
Hi guys.
How are
nice
you?
Nice to talk to you, Paul and Kerry. Nice. It's been a few months since the last time we spoke to each other.
It has, and yeah, I mean, I spoke to you about the show yesterday, and we've even come up with another show that we're going to do.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
We're on a roll.
We are,
Excellent.
absolutely.
I love this.
Yeah.
What's that one going to be about?
If we're lucky, in the course of the conversations today, we might come up with another one. So.
Oh, fantastic!
It might come down to feedback from your listeners. I don't know. I'll give a start then, shall I?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start at the beginning with the Knights Templar and
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I know there's an awful lot of people not really into the politics of the Middle East or the history of the church and all the rest of it. But so I'm going to try and fill in a few of the gaps for you. Your dog's out.
I'm sorry. I'll just mute my mic while I just thought he's upset about it. Carry on, please carry on.
Okay.
So even Kerry's dog's excited to hear about it.
Yeah, dog. Right. So let's get to year dot and Jerusalem. At the very centre of Jerusalem, the Jewish chronicles actually record that in 950 BC they built a temple to Saint Solomon, to King Solomon.
Yep.
And they built a temple there, and it subsequently was knocked down, and then I think there's a mosque there today, a Lacquer Mosque, and that's on the top of the hill. And if you look at the history of the region in the late 11th century, there's a major clash between not only the Roman Catholic Church, between them and Constantinople, which I don't know if you're aware, but the Roman Catholic Church actually split into two factions. Half went to settle in Constantinople, which is now modern Istanbul, and the Roman Church continued as they were, as a carry-on over the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Also, that's known as the Orthodox Church. You've also got into the mix, you've got the Arabs, and also the Turks. And they're all at each other's throats, and there's a major land grab between all of these different factions, and in the center of it is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the one.
Yeah.
Now, for Christians, Jerusalem is a major site for, the connection with Christ. The Jews associate it with Isaac, and the Muslims associate it with Muhammad. So everybody is actually vying for, position on this one.
Yeah.
Now, from the early centuries, the Christian church, in one form or another, actually possessed Jerusalem, and they were there for ages. And suddenly they're up against the Muslims. The Muslims really want to get that back.
Yeah.
Seriously, they do. The Muslim faith wasn't actually founded until 632, so they're a little bit up the line from us, really. From the Western world I'm talking about, rather than our beliefs. And on November the 27th, 1095, Pope Urban issued a thing called a papal bull. Now, this is a massive document which basically says, this is what I want you to do. And it was a call to arms for all Christians to rise up against the Muslims and to go and protect Jerusalem.
Yep.
Now, nobody really wanted to do that. So what they did was a really clever thing. They approached a lot of the prisons and the places of where all the criminals were and all that kind of thing, are all locked up, and said, if you go to the Holy Land and fight for us, we'll give you a pardon. And that's what they did. They all disappeared. They were a raggle-taggle bunch of criminals, no uniform, nothing. They just went out there, tough guys, really.
Yeah.
And had a right good scrap with the Muslims. That's what that was. They were crooks and thieves with no money whatsoever. Just the idea that they could, basically, it was a get out of prison free card.
I bet they all went for that.
There's an idea.
they kind of went at this one, and because they're such tough guys, they managed to capture Jerusalem quite successfully, actually.
Yeah.
Not without much of a fight, but they promptly disappeared and thought, we'll go back home now. We've done the job.
Yeah.
Which left the site to be vulnerable to the marauding masses again. And in 1118, famously, 9 anonymous knights from, I think, possibly from France and probably some other parts of of modern Europe, decided they'd go and protect the place. They chose to go and do it.
Yeah.
And they arrived at the mountain that was called the Temple of Solomon. It's the mount on the top of the temple. And that's where they get the name, the Knights Templars, from. They name themselves after the site itself.
Okay.
And their remit was to protect all of the major routes for pilgrims who want to go to the Holy Shrine, and to give them safe passage. This is, common thought throughout history. This is what, but there are certain doubts as to exactly that's what they were there for. Because there's a record from 1128 where the 9 knights tunnel underneath the temple rock. After, what are they going for? What are they looking for? Relics, valuables, valuable things for the Catholic Church to, keep in shrines.
Yeah.
But there's one prize which has been passed down history constantly, and it first appears in the 13th century. And there's a German guy called Wolfram von Eschenbach. I can just read my writing. In the 13th century, and he's a poet. And for the first time, he actually refers to the Templars possessing the Grail.
Okay.
Right. Now, most people, including, I was brought up a Roman Catholic, and I always thought it was a chalice.
Yeah.
Now, this is, if your guys want to have a look at on the internet, go and have a look at Leonardo da Vinci's famous fresco of the Last Supper.
Yes.
Everybody knows it. You can
Yeah.
buy postcards. You can. It's worldwide. And the one thing that's missing off that table is a cup. Is a chalice.
I've not noticed.
Most people don't notice it, but it is. It's missing. Its absence is absolutely quite obvious. Where is the chalice? You know, it should be there. It should be in front of Christ. It's not.
Yeah.
Not there. Now, we've also got from the annals from the Jewish calendar that in 70 AD that the Jews retracted from Temple Mount and they hid treasure a lot. Do you know about the Dead Sea Scrolls?
I've heard about them.
Qumran. It's a valley in I think it's modern day Palestine now, but there was a shepherd boy was playing around the caves in Qumran, and he was throwing stones at the caves, and he had some pottery crack.
Yeah.
So he climbed up, and he found the very first of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're the earliest record of Christianity. It goes right back. But they also found a beaten copper plate, which referred, once they translated what the wording was, that it referred to huge amounts of treasure that the Jews had hidden somewhere. And I think that's what the Templars were actually after. And 1128, the Knights suddenly up sticks and they come back to Europe. And they suddenly, overnight, become really, really wealthy people. And they go to France, and Bernard of Clairvaux, who was a major cleric at the time, he gave them a patronage, and he was a nephew of one of the knights, it turns out. So he was actually related to one of the knights. So he's given them some support. And they were originally known as the Order of the Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon. They vowed poverty, chastity, obedience, and poverty. But these guys have got so much money, you wouldn't believe it.
I was going to say, that's like a little bit of hypocrisy there, being as they had all this money, and then they go, oh, but we're going to take a vow of, like, poverty.
Yeah.
I'm
going to be poor now.
It's a bit two-handed, really, isn't it?
It is, really.
But if you look at their, they used to wear a kind of, like a pendant. And on the seals, you know, for sealing documents, there's a very famous picture of two knights sitting on one horse. You know, one behind the other, sitting on a horse, which suggests they've got no money. Well, they might not have had originally, but they did then.
Yeah.
1129, there's a massive fundraising event by the Templars. And what it did do, it completely galvanised all of the nobility in nearly all of the Western world, really, to go out and fight the Arabs and the Muslims and everybody else to keep Jerusalem, really.
Yeah.
And this is where what they did to save them being ambushed, you know, with people sort of picking on them as they go to Jerusalem. What the Templars did said, if you deposit your riches with us, we'll keep it in a safe box, and we'll give you a check. There's your check, and when you come back, we'll give it you back. And that's where the modern idea of a credit card comes from. That's true, and it is acknowledged worldwide now that they were the very first official bankers of, you know, in the modern era.
I wonder if they had overdraft charges and stuff.
Well, they certainly did. They certainly had loans. They certainly did, and it was illegal in the Catholic Church for you to actually make money make profit out of interest, which is still true with the Muslims today. They're not allowed to earn money from interest. It's part of the. But it goes right back to the Christian times as well. So nothing new there.
I bet that rule's not quite so So taken on board these days.
Or bent the rules a little bit there.
Yeah,
and they kept it. But what it does do, it indicates that these checks were ciphered, so they got a code within them. And once you got the code like your PIN number, only you knew that PIN number. And somebody stole it. They couldn't do anything with it because they don't know the code number.
Yeah.
So, what seems to have happened is because they were such a close secret society, they developed their own little kind of rituals and this, that, and the other. Just very, very secret, and ciphers and symbols. And by which time, by 1150, they're no longer supporting the route safe passage for people to go to the Holy Land. They've shifted their whole ideas a little bit now, and they are really seriously up against one of the biggest threats to them was a guy called Saladin, who led the Arab or the Muslim forces in 1177, and there was a massive battle at Montgisard, and this kind of throws things into real perspective because Saladin had 26,000 men under his army. The Crusaders had 500. They had 500 and a few infantry men, because most of the guys were on horse, right?
Yeah.
And they defeated Saladin.
That's because they had God on their side.
Yeah. Well, something happened.
Yeah.
And they were known as fierce fighters. Even Saladin actually acknowledged that he was scared stiff of them, really. And their winning aspect, this is the Crusaders, was the fact they were on horseback, but they rode a big horse called a destrier. It's called a destrier. Now, the reason it's called destrier is after the Norman French. It's the dexter is Latin for left. So you guide the horse with your left hand, and you swipe out with your sword or your shield or whatever in your other hand. And they were trained up from being children. And the Arabs just, the Muslims didn't know what to do with this because they were just chased off, basically.
Yeah.
By which time that the Crusader coffers were really spilling over with money. There was money coming from, because of all this money that's being deposited with them, some of the nobles never actually came back because they got killed in action. So they just kept the money. 1189, Pope Innocent II granted the Templars unlimited privileges, which meant they didn't have to pay taxes, nothing. They were just given a free hand. So what on earth was going on there?
Wow.
Had the Templars actually got something that the Catholic Church really wanted, and they got them almost at a ransom, almost to the point, we'll do anything for it. One of the key claims was that they had a fragment of the true cross that Christ was crucified on. And that was, one of the things they said they'd got. Well, whether that's true or not is anybody's guess.
Yeah.
But the Muslims nicked it off them eventually, so they didn't have that anymore. And again, later on in 1887, a guy called Gerard de Rietefort, he fought Saladin at a place called Tiberias, but was beaten. He was beaten by the Muslim forces. And one of the oaths that the Templars used to give at the time of initiation was they would never surrender. They would never take themselves as a ransom or as a hostage. They'd rather die. Gerard, unfortunately, went and kicked that one into the long grass, and he reneged on his oath, much to the dismay of all of his men. So the Saladin's men basically took him into into captivity. And this is where Richard the Lionheart starts to turn up on the history books.
Okay.
And by which time he manages to win back. So the Saladin's he's captured Jerusalem by force. Richard the Lionheart turns up. He manages to get it back off them, only for a short time. Then the Turks move in, and they run the place for years afterwards. Then there's a massive battle in 1291 at a place called Acre in the Middle East, and the Muslims slaughter the Crusaders, headed by Louis IX of France and Edward I of England, and that's the third crusade. They fail completely, so Jerusalem is back in the hands of the Muslims. Now we move to the next stage, and there's a guy called Jacques de Molay, and each of what we call the commanderies, the centres of power for the Templars throughout Europe and the Middle East. They're palaces, they're castles, really, effectively. And they've all got a master running them. And the Grand Master of the lot is this Jacques de Molay, and he's the Grand Master of the lot. He covers everybody. He realises he's actually lost the Holy Land, and they're all getting very dismayed about all of this. And the whole of the Templar idea has lost the whole reason for them being there. And so by 1307, and the date is, as you reminded me yesterday, Paul, October Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Day when the commanderies were attacked and the Knights Templars were arrested. A lot of them were actually arrested. The guy who was on the throne in France at the time is King Philip the Fourth, otherwise known as the Fair. And he summoned all of the Templars to Paris in 1307. He basically wanted to get them all in one place so he could stick them in prison, really. That's all he wanted to do. And many were charged with all sorts of ridiculous trumped-up charges. That one of the most common ones was devil worship. Philip, this is the subtext to it, Philip owed them so much money that he thought, right, if I call them heretics, lock them up, I don't have to owe them a penny. It was simple, dead simple. Really simple thoughts. So during this period, you get all sorts of ideas and rumours about what the Templars were really up to. And there's one little snippet that I've always come across was they kept a human head, and they kept this head in a cupboard. It was supposed to be St. John Baptist.
Okay.
And that was one of their trophies, if you like. They were accused of spitting on the cross, of like I say, devil worship, sodomy, or you think anything that you probably would think in the medieval times was a definite no-no. And then this period where Pope Clement is actually on the papal throne, he's living in France and he can't do anything about it, because what they've done is they've sent him to the Inquisitions. I mean, these guys, if you ever see Monty Python's Flying Circus, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Well, these guys were trained up to the hilt. They were not allowed to draw blood. That was the thing. So they did anything else other than that.
Yeah. And
one of the main punishments was strappado, which is where you get tied your hands behind your back, and they hoist you up basically backwards. So you're hanging upside down with your hands tied behind your head, where the whole of your body is actually pretty much on your shoulders, and they dislocated the shoulders. Horrible stuff, really. And the tally that I got out of some of the books was out of 138 who were questioned, 105 denied Christ under duress, 103 admitted to what they call the obscene kiss. If you don't know what that is. That's kissing the backside of the devil, really. That's carried on. And 123 spat on the cross. If we go back to Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, he was tortured terribly, and under torture he actually admitted just about everything they wanted him to admit to. But he later he reneged on it. He said, "No, I'm not. I'm renouncing what I've said before. You nearly killed me, and I'm not going to confess to that one." So, 1314, they've gone through these terrible inquisitions, and on March the 18th, Jacques de Molay, who was the Grand Master, and also Joseph de Charmey of Normandy, who was another one of the masters, they were slow roasted next to a slow fire.
Oh, gosh. They
were not burnt at the stake. They were just left in front of this slow burning fire and just left for several days to roast. And then they threw the ashes into the Seine. So that there were no relics. People that thought, oh, martyrs, they've martyred them. I mean, such brutality beggars belief, but that's what the Middle Ages are about.
Yeah.
So the Knights Templars, what appears to have happened is that the ones that did manage to escape just disappeared completely, with whatever secrets they had, whatever treasures they had. They might have had the Grail. Who knows what they had? And they just completely and utterly disappeared until you've got groups like the Rosicrucians suddenly turn up with all sorts of legends about their connections with the Templars and the dark mysteries of the act.
Yeah.
And then you've got the rise of the Freemasonry. Now, the Freemasonry are around predominantly during the 18th century, and Mozart was one. All the great and the good belonged to lodges that associated themselves with they traced it right back to ancient Egypt, to the architect of the pyramids, really.
Okay.
I don't know. I've known quite a few Freemasons, not stonemasons, Freemasons, and they all seem to tell us a different story to, what I know.
Yeah.
But one of the key factors about the Freemasons, and they deny it today. I heard somebody on the radio the other day that it's not a secret society, that anybody can go in to the lodges and see what they've got. Well, I beg to differ on that one. I've always found them to be really they keep the cards very close to the chest.
Yeah.
I've been offered membership a couple of few times, and I've always declined it. It's famously, and I always use this one. Do you remember the Marx Brothers?
Yeah.
The comedy.
Yeah.
Film people. Groucho was the guy with the drawn-on mustache.
Yeah.
And he's famous for his one-liners, and he's famous for saying, "I would never join a group that would have me as a member." That's Groucho Marx, and I totally agree with him. I don't either. But what we've ended up with is this. If we go back to the Da Vinci Code, that there's still this kind of niggling interest in what on earth has been going on all these years, and is it the Holy Bloodline, or what exactly is it? I mean,
yeah.
I actually quite enjoyed the Da Vinci Code film.
Yeah, I did.
Tom Hanks.
I loved it. Yeah, I enjoyed the book and I loved the film. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, it's beautifully produced, beautifully made, and it's quite tense as well. It is a proper thriller. And I was telling Paul about this the other day, that when I went to take my archaeology degree in Nottingham a few years ago, my tutor got me to take on medieval architecture as a subject. And Jenny, my tutor, she had a what's called a green card for Lincoln Cathedral, which meant she could go anywhere she wanted in the cathedral. And she rang me up one day and said, I'm going to go and do some research. Any chance you'd like to join me? And we can go into the bits that people can't normally go in. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's an opportunity.
Please, yes, please. Now, if you don't know Lincoln Cathedral, it's the front part of the building dates to the late 11th century. The rest of it is Norman and 13th century and subsequent dates. And anyway, she said, wear some old clothes because it's very dirty and you're going to get absolutely filthy. And we went through trapdoors, down little corridors. It was like a labyrinth, and we ended up in the very, very heart of the old part of the cathedral. The old part of the cathedral actually started out as a castle. It was a defended building. And then they added the church to it out subsequently through the medieval period. And she said, come and look at this. You're not going to believe this. The production company originally wanted to use Westminster Abbey to film the Da Vinci Code, where Tom Hanks's character goes into the main church, the big one, the big church. Mm. Well, Westminster wouldn't let them have it, so Lincoln Cathedral said, well, we're up for that one. And that's where they filmed it. It wasn't in Westminster Abbey. It's in the book, but that's not true.
Yeah.
But what Jenny showed me, and I couldn't believe it, the camera crew and the sound people had scratched graffiti, modern graffiti, on 11th century stone.
No.
Yeah, she was absolutely livid.
I bet she was. No, I can understand that. That's disgraceful.
She did report it, and I think they got a bit of a recompense over it as well. So,
yeah.
But that's my claim to fame with Vinci Code, if nothing else.
You can see where he got the ideas for the book from. I mean, literally in the first 10, 15 minutes, you were talked about codes, banks, Leonardo da Vinci, the Grail.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see where somebody could, when you break it down, oh my God, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Well, and it's a little bit more believable than having the Cup of Christ.
The two books which actually came out and I bought and read in the 70s was the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, which that was the original book. And the two authors actually, I think they tried to sue Dan Brown for plagiarism.
Oh.
And I think they came to some sort of financial agreement over that one. But that's where I originally read it. And the BBC also produced maybe one or two very, very dedicated programs about it. And you're sitting there thinking, why didn't we know about this already? You can go and see them on YouTube. They're actually quite worth a watch, actually. But it subsequently parts of the theory don't hang together. We've come along, but it's a great story, and it's all to do with geometry and locations in the landscape and secret societies and all the rest of it. As you say, it's all wheels within wheels, really. Yeah. And they've kept things really quiet about that one. So that spurred me on. When I saw that the Da Vinci Code had been written, I bought a paperback version of it, read it. I thought, actually, that's not half bad. I've not read the sequel, the Angels and Demons. Is it?
Oh, it's just good.
Is it?
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, he's really, really good at taking a story and adding bits into it, and sometimes bringing facts in that aren't relevant, particularly to the real life history of it, but tying all those points together and making an absolute fantastic thriller. I love all of his books, to be fair. I'm a huge fan of Dan Brown.
Yeah.
And as I say, the Da Vinci Code really set on fire for a lot of people, resurging the Knights Templar story.
Yeah.
But there's, with any of these kind of things, because they've gone very quiet, they went very quiet, which I don't blame them after what happened around, the torturing times and all that sort of thing. you don't blame them for being a bit quiet after that, do you?
I'm not surprised.
They want to kick their head down.
I've got one little snippet which this is actually scribbled in the margins of my notes, and it's just reminded me to mention it. For the listeners who don't know anything about me, I was the head custodian of Castle Rising Castle in Norfolk for 10 years. And I'm a trained archaeologist. I'm a former professional artist. And I was one of the very first people to actually pick up that the place was truly haunted. And I was the first person to actually catch the very first paranormal picture photograph that subsequently proved to be true.
Mm.
Now, I saw my very first apparition early one morning as I was opening the site up. And after about a year into the post, I used to work all the way through the year, so I was the only person on site during the winter months, regardless of the weather. And a couple turned up late one afternoon in a November. It was a dismal, horrible afternoon, clutching a file under their arm. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Photographs." "Really? Would you like to see them?" So, "Go on then." So I flicked through the little photo album. I said, "Oh, have you been... When did you take these photographs?" He says, "Well, we trespassed about a week ago on a Saturday night, and it was really cold." I said, "Well, these misty shapes and that's just your breath. Did you smoke cigarettes near the camera?" "No." And then I turned the page, and this one really knocked me for six. And I says, "Is that genuine?" And Holly said, "Yeah, that's genuine. Can I have the SD card? I want the original." She gave me the SD card. And it's a horse under the gatehouse. In the gatehouse. You can go and see it on my website.
Yeah.
www.normanfahy.com.
I'll share that into the chat room so people can go and have a look.
Yeah.
I'll do that for you.
Holly's horse. Now, I'm not a big expert on horses, but this looks like a real thing, and there's a rider. There is a rider on it. And about a year later, I was given a slide lecture, really, on some of the stuff I'd found. And a lady stood up in the audience. She says, "I breed horses, and I know exactly what that horse is." And there was this kind of pregnant pause, and she says, "It's extinct."
Oh.
She says, it's called a destrier. It's the Norman war horse, and they bred it from a mixture of Arab horses, and they mixed it with something else. The nearest you can actually get to it today, in a field, and it's still a rare breed, called a Suffolk Punch. That's the nearest.
Yeah, I know the Suffolk Punch.
Yeah, the Suffolk Punch. It's like it's like a stocky, it's like a draft animal.
Yeah.
Now, the Normans, because I learned an awful lot about the Normans due to the castle. The nobles never walked anywhere. They used to ride either a little donkey called a palfrey, day-to-day stuff. But when they went into battle, they got a destrier, this huge, great big battle horse, which knocked everybody for six. And there's one of those in that archway. She said, "I can," and she stood up and she pointed. "Look, the anatomical features on this image tells me," and you can see the tail swishing from side to side. It's not the prettiest view of a horse, I'll be honest with you. It's the back end. But she kind of qualified this photograph, which I thought looked convincing anyway. But that was not steamy breath. That was something that was definitely under the arch, because I've often heard the clinking of armour and all that kind of stuff. And they did feature it on GHI, the GHI programme, which I appeared in. And they got Holly in. Actually, they managed to locate her, and they gave her a little bit of an interview. She says, "Yeah, that's what we saw. That's exactly what we saw." So that's just as an aside, really. Is there anything you want to ask me, you guys?
Well, yeah. I watched this program called Oak Island. It's got to be mentioned.
This is his thing at the moment.
Do you know? Yeah. And well, no. What interested me was that they found what they thought was a cross.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this to you yesterday as well.
Yeah.
But it was drawn on the wall of one of the prisons that the Templar were in, and it was supposed to be an idol of Tanit, a goddess of the sea. I think they said there was.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought all Templars were Christian, so why would they have another idol?
Pagan symbol.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you need to understand is that they did actually recruit just about anybody at one point.
Okay.
And during some of the battles where the Templars were actually losing ground, some of the guys would actually go and defect to the Muslims and take, become Muslim. How bad's that? But that's what they did. They'd save the skin, really. One of the most one of my most memories that I've got regarding the Templars was I investigated a place called Newark, which is actually in Nottinghamshire, Newark Castle, and it was the Bishop's Castle originally, and they boast two what they call oubliettes, which are place where you leave people to forget. Yeah. And we know for a fact, judging from the records, that the Templars would cast down into these two oubliettes, two very, very separate parts of the building. I've never been so scared in all my life, because I went in, we shut the door, we shut the trap door. You have to climb down, actually. You have to climb down. And there are carvings on the wall from the original, from the Templars actually being incarcerated in there. Poor sod. They were just left to die, really. That was it, because they were completely and utterly rejected by everybody, really. And people thought they were in league with the devil. And so everybody that was, going to church and all the rest of it, we don't have anything to do with that lot. They're naughty boys, None of it, hardly any of it was true, and hardly ever any witnesses. Nobody really came forward and said, "Well, actually, I've seen such and such," and these people did those things.
Yeah, but
it was mostly made up to try and get the money out of them. That was it. It was all due to money. Times do not change, do they?
No.
They don't change.
No.
The nearest we've got to the Templars today is got to be the Freemasons. I'm going to have to keep coming back to that. They're ever present. They're even on the dollar bill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you look at the dollar bill, what's on top of the pyramid?
An eye.
There's an eye. Yeah.
So they're keeping an eye on you. They're watching.
They're keeping an eye on you, and the square and compass appear. George Washington, very famous painting of George Washington. What's he doing? He's standing there with his Masonic apron, which has got a square and compass on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He was the Mason. All the big guys were, and they always have been throughout history. A lot of police officers, if you look into the kind of memberships that they've got, they nearly all belong to lodges.
Mm.
They do. It's true.
Yeah.
They don't deny it.
Is there also a connection between the Illuminati and the Templar?
Yeah, there are certain people who've actually drawn associations with the two. This again.
That's saying Kerry's off.
The Illuminati is a subject all on its own, really. But
we must
the connections, yes. People have drawn parallels between the two things, and that can get really quite complicated. I've never really spent a great deal of time studying that.
Okay. Do you believe then that the chalice or the cup of Christ is the bloodline of Christ, or do you sort of believe that it is just literally a cup?
I don't think it's a cup.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I don't think it is a cup. I think it's allegorical. It's a representation, and there are a few videos on YouTube if you want to look at them, and they study the fresco that Da Vinci produced, and Mary Magdalene.
Sorry about that, guys.
Mary
all goes
Magdalene
mad at this time of day.
There is one of the apostles is actually sitting to his right hand side, and it's clearly not a man. It's very much a female looking image.
Okay.
And then if you look at the video, you can see where they come from in this. And the way this figure is actually leaning in towards Christ creates that cup shape, that V shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did. They demonstrated that incredibly well, didn't they?
Yes. Yeah. So
it's things like this, when you look at these famous paintings, that sometimes it takes somebody to go, look at it. Like you said, there's no chalices on there. There's plates and there's little shallow bowls, which, you could argue might be drinking vessels, but there's no obvious cups in that painting at all.
Yeah, but he might just forgot or something.
No,
or maybe,
no.
Maybe they're not even being served.
The amount of people at that table, if you're sitting down to a dinner, you would have cups on the table, and there is distinctly lacking in cups on the table.
Okay.
As I say, there's bowls and there's like these, and they're really small, like little finger bowls almost, aren't they, Norman?
yes, they are.
And then there's plates.
Yeah.
Maybe Leonardo couldn't paint glasses.
Really? You're going with
He's so
couldn't do
idea.
that?
Maybe just had a thing against them and just didn't want to put them in.
No,
I don't know.
I think it was a deliberate. I think he deliberately didn't put them in.
Da Vinci. I've got three heroes in my life, historical heroes. Leonardo da Vinci, one. Sir Isaac Newton.
Mm-hmm.
Sir Christopher Wren.
Uh-huh.
And there are certain things that connect all of those three people. You'd say maybe Da Vinci couldn't draw glasses, or no, I bet he could blow a glass. He was that clever. He knew more about anything than anybody on earth.
Mm-hmm.
He designed it, the original parachute. He invented the tank. This bloke. He invented.
Didn't he invent the aeroplane as well? Or
yes, he did.
Similar?
Yeah, it's actually it's actually in the British Science Museum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a man-powered. It's a man-powered plane. Yeah, but his parachute was actually shaped like a pyramid. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Famous pictures of it. But not only that, he risked being called up by the Inquisition. I think he was actually for doing dissections on human bodies to try and find out how the body.
Yeah, he did all that, didn't he?
He did all that.
Yeah.
And he did all the rest of it. And he painted the Mona Lisa. What did he do in his spare time? Did he sweep the floor of the yard or what?
You think you wouldn't have time for anything else, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And yet he was kind of ducking under the radar all the time. And he was paid quite a lot of money to actually invent missiles, and most of it was actually warfare associated. And he wasn't very good at sculpting much. He left that to Michelangelo, but and they were big rivals. But he was a genius. And where on earth do you get that kind of? And he used to, so that they wouldn't actually find out what he was doing, he'd write his notes with a mirror in front of him, and he'd write it all backwards.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until sort of the late 19th century, somebody just said, hang on a minute, if you put a mirror up against that, you can actually read it. So, he's kind of really trying to escape the threat of the church, really, because what he was doing was really against the church's teaching. You know, you're not supposed to do that kind of thing. And he actually broke the mould for modern medicine, you know, modern anatomy.
Yeah.
He's ahead of his time.
He was ahead of his time. This is where I come in, because when I left art college in the 70s, my very first job was an anatomical illustrator in Birmingham Medical School.
Yeah.
And I had a Leonardo da Vinci existence for 2 years. I did it. I'm one of the very few people. I did it. I actually dissected a human being from one end to the other. It took me 2 years, and I drew it.
Wow.
I've still got the drawings. No, most of it's done by virtual reality these days. That, you know, the medical students are not given what's known as a cadaver, which is a dead body, effectively.
Yeah.
Well,
first-hand experience.
I was. When I left, the prof who looked after me says, "What would you like as a leaving present?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And he says, "Well, we bought you a Collins dictionary, a big one. What else would you like?" And I said, "There's a skull in one of the storerooms that's doing nothing." Do you mind if and he says, and he just looked at me kind of quizzed, and he said, "What?" I said, "Well, there's no skeleton with it. It's just a skull." He said, "It's a very strange request. I've still got it. I do look after it. I've got a very, very goth existence."
I have a question for you.
Go on, Kerry.
There is a big myth that there are 12 Knights Templar buried beneath the Roslin Chapel. Is that true?
I don't know about that. Roslin is definitely a mysterious, one of the oddest churches in the country. There's only one that really, as far as I'm concerned, because that's in Scotland technically, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's in Scotland. So if we think about what is the oddest church in England, and I've studied it for years, and it's where Richard III was born, a place called Fotheringay. Okay, Fotheringay. It's in Northamptonshire. And it's the most peculiar. It's a rebuild from a 13th century church, but what they did was they copied the old bit and duplicated it, if you get what I'm saying. But it's where Mary Queen of Scots had her head chopped off, and they stored a body somewhere in the Fotheringay church in the crypt, and nobody's ever been able to find the crypt. Well, I did, in 2000, I did a dowsing survey, because I do water divining and divination. I actually located the crypt. And there's a guy who used to be a bell ringer. I can't remember his name now, but you walk into the church itself and you go through the porch, and to one side is what looks like a little kitchenette type thing. It's called the treasury. And one day when he was going in to check the bells, he noticed that one of the flagstones in the room rocked slightly. And he rocked it a bit more, and a bit more came through. And he's an electrician. What he did was he got an optic fibre camera, and he poked it down through the crack, and he discovered another room. They excavated it. I've been in it several times, and you can go in it, but there's a blocked doorway inside it, exactly where I said there would be a doorway. Exactly.
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah, I even surprised myself over that one.
That's moments like that, as an archaeologist and a dowser and stuff like that, that you go, wow, that's just so cool. And they don't happen very often, do they, really, in the amount of work you've done? No, but it's those gems that you're...
It's a confirmation, isn't it?
The other claim to fame for Fotheringay Church, it's well worth a trip out there. It was built by one man, William Horwood, and this is where we start talking stonemasonry, right? Stonemasons had what was called a lodge, and it was like either a lean-to shed or like a proper room, where they used to draw out the architectural features on the floor, and they used to do the really fancy carvings. And what Hallward did, he came to some agreement with the Duke of York, and that he was given 10 years to build this thing, and his signature was a letter H, like a Gothic H, right? Mm. And what he did was, the only thing that's not in the contract is his lodge, and that's the room that's underneath the porch. That's what he. But he built it out of all the bits of masonry from the previous church that's got a mason's mark on it. Mm. They're everywhere. So you'd have young apprentices in there teaching them how to do the fancy carving work, and he did all the fancy work inside the castle, in the church itself. So when you walk around the church, you see that on every pillar and post is a letter H. If you get the opportunity to go up into what's called the ringing chamber, where the bell ringers are, there's a 6-inch high letter H everywhere. Well, I've been right into the very top of the steeple, and the biggest H you have ever seen in your life, and it's about a foot high. He was running out of room, this guy, wasn't he? He was saying, "I paid for this. No, I built this. I want paying for this." And he was threatened with prison if he didn't finish it on time. Well, he did, only just. Yeah. He kind of snuck in under the wire a little bit, but you can see the higher you go up in the building, this is a true craftsman, true stonemason, top of his craft, being paid top dollar for doing the best of the work. Now the Plantagenets, that's where their mausoleum is in Fotheringay Church. A lot of people don't realise that. The Plantagenets, the Normans, that's where they were. But yeah, and Mary Queen of Scots, when she had her head chopped off at the castle, they placed her, and I've got the book. It says they placed her in the crypt. They reattached her head and wrapped her up in brown paper or something like that, and stood upright in the crypt. And then she's transferred to Peterborough Cathedral, which a few miles away, and ultimately she ended up in Westminster Abbey. I think that's where she was finally interred. But a lot of these stories all got little kind of side tracks, and and this is what I've picked up over the years, and that's what I love about the whole subject. And they all do link in. Eventually.
It's almost sorry.
Go on.
You go on a hunt in two different directions, though, don't you? You go on the hunt in physical evidence in these churches and these places and symbology and something like that. But you also go on a hunt in regards to, like, the information that goes on behind it, like the research in document.
Yeah, that's a classic example for me because for those who've never been to Castle Rising, one of the things that I always questioned about the castle itself, which dates to 1138, which is pretty much exactly just before the Crusade, really, it's decorated like a church.
Yeah.
All the arches and everything, it's very, very church-like, and I could never understand why that was. And it took me the best part of 8 years to get to the bottom of it. And I set up the history group in the village, and one of the researchers rang me up at work, and she says, "Are you sitting down?" I said "Why?"
I love those moments. Are you sitting down? You know it's going to be good.
Yeah. And she said, "I've just been through the monastic documents of Thetford Priory, which is also in Norfolk. It's ruined. And it says," and she quoted it over the phone to me. She says, "The Priory Church of St Mary Thetford install a cell of Holy Brothers in Rising Castle." So it was actually built as a monastery rather than a castle. It can defend itself like the ones out in the Middle East.
Yeah.
It nailed it for me. I just wanted that one little bit of information that had been
that
buried.
tiny nugget. Yeah.
It's been buried for years and years. Nobody had ever come across it before. I was in my element, and all of my theories all kind of collided in together, and I thought, wow, this has got to be the best of the best.
Yeah,
I've never been to the Middle East. I don't intend going, to be honest with you. But it would be nice to actually go out and see some of these places, in association with the historic record.
Yeah.
I'd like to go to Jerusalem, or mine, but it's a war zone.
The problem is, exactly. It's if you was able to just go and visit these places without the tourist factor as well, then that would be awesome. But because you've got that people factor, and it's so busy, you just don't even get a chance to do what you want to do, which is live and breathe it whilst you're there, because there's too many. It's the same with Egypt, isn't it? When you go to see the pyramids, it's just so touristy that it ruins it. It ruins that.
I think with the Jerusalem, it's more to do with I think it's so high profile that everyone wants to go. Especially if they're really into the Bible and
if you're religious,
really like a religious nut sort of thing, then that's where you want to go.
Well, I do know for a fact that if you go to the Temple of the Mount, you knock on the door, and there's a head sticks out of a window about 20 foot above you to ask what you want. They won't let you in. but
that's very medieval as well, isn't it? That conjures up a lot of images from films
Monty
that
Python.
Yeah, I was going to say.
He's a life bride. But he's a Muslim. He's a Muslim, and he looks after the Temple of the Mount.
Uh-huh.
So, I don't know what he did.
Fantastic.
I saw it on the TV a few years ago. I couldn't believe it, but it was just the way his head came out this window. We want. we are the Knights of Ni.
Yeah, it is very much like that, isn't it?
And I think on that bombshell, we have actually come to the end of the show.
Oh, brilliant! Love it.
Oh yeah, it's been a really good show.
To talk to you guys again, and if you want me to come on again, I'm more than happy.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I want you to come on and join us about the talk on the mysterious Earth.
Yes.
And your stone circles and
Earth mysteries,
yeah. That would be really good. I'll arrange that for us. Absolutely.
Keep in touch, Paul and Kerry.
I will do.
Yes, definitely.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Okay, and so thanks everyone in the chat room. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Norman, for joining me. And I shall see you all again next week.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.